Okay, kids, it's time for another episode of the Fueled by Weird podcast, the only podcast taking place from 221A Baker Street. I'm Chris Daly, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with Daniel Kalban. Daniel, how's it going, man?
How are you?
I'm doing good. Um, it's a pleasure to get to talk to you again. You are one of the very few people who have been on both versions of my show, so that's kind of awesome. Very cool. Okay, so we've talked before, like I said, but I usually like to start things off with an icebreaker question. So today's question is, what's your favorite happy hour drink?
Problem is, I'm not a drinker,
And that's okay
so
because I planned for a backup plan for this because I'm really not either. So let's say if you were to go to like a soda place or just like get a coffee, like what's your go-to drink, let's say?
hmm. Probably if it's just like a coffee place, like an Arnold Palmer.
Okay.
If it's like a soda, probably like a plain like cola, like Pepsi or Coke, or it's probably just it's a Shirley Temple.
Okay.
'Cause sometimes you just want something that's a little more than just your basic soda.
That's true.
So there is
Uh,
a place we went to last year for my office Christmas party, which has some really interesting mocktails. I just wish I could remember which one I liked.
gotcha. I think for me, my favorite go-to, like you said, kind of just like a regular Pepsi or a Coke or Mountain Dew is usually my go-to drink. Lately it's kind of been Fanta Orange. I don't know why. I just kind of like that one, but particularly if I go to like a Dutch Bros. I don't know how widespread those are. But it's kind of like a coffee drink place. They have they have a blended lemonade that I really like. So it's kind of like a lemonade slushy, and then I'll go a little bit crazy and get a flavor put in. Like I'll get a blue raspberry or an orange. So it's like a blue raspberry lemonade or an orange lemonade. It's kind of cool, but it's weird and I always get weird looks when I ask for it, but it tastes really good.
Yeah, like because like you go to Starbucks, my usual drink throughout the year until it gets too cold is a chicken iced tea lemonade.
That
No
works.
extra sugar because there's just enough sugar in it as it is. So
Yeah, very cool. All right, man. So, the concept of the show Fueled by Weird is, all the stuff that you're into, your hobbies, your interests kind of come together and make you who you are. So, what are some of the things that you're into?
well, if we're going to do it, well, video games, theater, comics, obviously because we're here to talk about comics.
Sure.
Literature, again, kind of influencing this latest Kickstarter.
Yeah,
Film, music,
very cool.
eclectic
Now,
all over the place.
that's awesome. And that's kind of what I do too. Just I consider myself a jack of all trades and a
Yeah.
master of none. I kind of just like to dabble in a little bit of everything because, life's too short to just be able to stick to one thing and not, want to try anything else.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of take things back in the Wayback Machine and I want to kind of get in to the past a little bit and find out what exactly it was that got you interested in becoming a writer in the first place.
I don't know. It's like I've always been fascinated, but like I was writing stuff like in first grade, and those stories in here and there, and like just telling stories. It doesn't probably didn't hurt that I was like right across the street from the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. And a mom who really encouraged reading. So
Hmm?
I mean, I was reading by the time I was 4, which probably did work. So I was reading early on, and also probably a lot of PBS growing up because like Wishbone still
Oh, sure.
does a lot.
Yeah,
Probably helped a lot of lit influence literature. So it's all these things, having like access to a lot of things to read from an early age that helped.
very cool. Now, what was it that kind of led you from, being a writer to, writing comic books, or what was it that got you interested in comic books in the first place?
So originally at one point I wanted to be a film director, but I was going to a different college and I didn't have a film course. So but I always had this kind of interest in comics because when I was a kid, I couldn't get them that often because my mom's very much you have to read actual books, not comics.
Sure.
My dad found back at my grandparents' house his old comics from like the 60s.
Oh, nice.
So I have some old Silver Age stuff I used to read. So they were not great condition. I got them; they're in terrible condition now.
Sure.
Um, and also I could get them like some graphic novels here, but like I have this interest. Then in 2010, I was home from college for the holidays, and it was a blizzard. massive blizzard,
Hmm.
and I'm bored, stuck inside, as one is after a blizzard. I'm like, you know what? Let me get back into reading some comics because comicsology I
Yeah.
just became aware of at the time.
Mhm.
So I got to that. I started thinking to myself, you know what? I could write a fan film script. So I
Okay.
did. It's not great. An attempt was made. Um, and I thought, oh, then another fan fiction script, and then I started writing more fan fiction or fan like. Then I started writing fan comic scripts. Then I started writing my own stuff. So it was a weird shift from being stuck in a Blizzard board, and all of a sudden I started writing fan stuff to writing my own stuff. And then I started thinking to myself, it's somewhat cheaper, not by much, but somewhat to do a comic than it is to make a film.
Yeah.
Oh,
Very cool. So, like you mentioned, we are here today to talk about comic books, and we want to talk about your newest project, Sherlock Holmes: The Phantom Masquerade, Issue One. But why don't
yeah.
we talk a little bit about that?
So I always had a fascination with both Sherlock Holmes and Phantom of the Opera. It didn't hurt, so to speak. So when my mom was pregnant with me, so she worked at the publisher that published the companion book to the musical
Oh,
Phantom of
cool.
the Opera. So
Hmm.
like the stuff about the show and influences, including the original novel. So when she was very pregnant with me, she saw the original Broadway company, The Phantom. So I probably heard that in utero. And then
That's
of course
cool.
growing up, you can't escape in English speaking world Sherlock Holmes. And so I had a fascination with both books and both characters. And then a couple years ago, I was writing a Sherlock Holmes story. I'm like, this is not really working for me. Like, I like it, but I don't think it would really work. It might not be it. So I put that to the side, and I'm trying to think of something else. I think suddenly the idea of Sherlock Holmes versus Phantom of the Opera. Now, technically, it's been done before, but it's usually just taking Sherlock Holmes and just dropping him into the original novel Phantom of the Opera.
Sure.
I decided let this be more of a sequel to the original novel, more than just taking Holmes and dropping him in. Because that's more interesting. Because like, what happened to these characters 10 years on, especially since the Phantom's supposed to be spoiler for an over 100-year-old novel, supposed to be dead at the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the original silent movie of Lon Chaney is going to be 100 years old next year, so it goes to 115 for the original book. Um, and then so I have to also make sure I didn't step on certain people's toes, namely Andrew Lloyd Webber's, because he had his whole Love Never Dies disaster of a musical. So I'm like, okay, so Ron Christine Hamstad, I can't name him Gustav because Andrew Lloyd Webber beat me to that punch, so I have to name him Philippe after the name of Paul's brother from the original novel. I cannot use the Phantom's mask as seen in the musical, obviously, because that's trademark, copyrighted Andrew Lloyd Webber. You can do
Yeah.
a mask like this, like you see on the poster, because even though that's on the poster, every Phantom mask is like this. You can't have anything like this,
Yeah.
or whatever it is on my face.
The half mask. Yeah.
The vertical half mask versus the horizontal.
Right.
So that can't be done. I also can't obviously do something like, oh, make the kid really Phantom Christine's son, which I wanted to do in the first place, because that's kind of gross in so many ways. Because it's basically saying, oh, Christine had a relationship with her abuser while cuckolding her husband. No, no, no. That is just a bad. And also, as Lindsay Alice points out, it's like every character from Family Opera to Love Never Dies just totally takes to like several layers of asshole.
Sure.
And it's just like none of the character arcs make sense if you compare Phantom to Love Never Dies. So I'm like, okay, so we're sticking. But also, again, I'm sticking to the original novel because that's public domain. So it's like, what happened 10 years on after the events? Like, how are all Christine living? If the Phantom's alive, how do you survive? And so on and so forth. And of course, a little bit of Phantom goes a long way, at least in these first initial issues.
Sure.
Because even if you read the original novel, um, the Phantom isn't in it that much. If you look at the musical, he's not in it that much. The little
Yeah.
goes a long way.
Sure.
Because otherwise, you're just overwhelming us with an abusive monster with a lot of feelings.
It's true.
And that's what people seem to forget that the Phantom, Eric, is a horrible human being because the one has, their Fannin. of oh, he's a little marshmallow who really wants love. Oh, yes, he wants love, but he's an abusive, obsessive monster.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful going that line. And with Sherlock Holmes, it's like, okay, I want to do like my version of Sherlock, but how much of it's really me? How much of it's canon? How much of it's like from, little bits of pop culture?
Yeah.
And then so I had to figure out where does which one, what do I take from each one? Because I wanted to keep closer to the original, again, the canonical Holmes. Well, some pop culture version tropes. Um, so yes, he gave me a little bit of an asshole, but not to the asshole level of say the Benedict Cumberbatch version.
Sure.
So I've been more with the Jeremy Brett version, which is my preferred Sherlock
Okay.
Holmes. Eccentric can be a jerk, but it's also very charming and funny. And but also this is Holmes right after he came back from the dead after the final problem adventure with Moriarty. So he's suffering his own ghost, so to speak, from that case. Well, several years prior. Because it's like 6 months after the adventure of the empty house, which is his return. So this is very much early second half of the Holmes stories,
Okay.
for lack of a better idea, canonical timeline that I'm now distorting with its whole Crimson Casebook idea.
Very cool. So for those who, might not be familiar with, the story, can we talk a little bit about what we're going to see in issue one?
So in issue one, Holmes and Watson attend a concert put on by an impresario named Joe Eckhart, who's a real historical person. He's the guy who did the Wilbur and Sullivan operas.
Hmm.
And he's having a concert starring Christine Day, now Comtesse Christine de Chagny, um, which is married Rao. And during this concert, we find out A. Holmes is back on the drugs because he's bored out of the gourd.
Yeah.
And two, as Christine takes her bowels after a successful concert, she hears a voice of a person she thinks is long dead. And that scares the shit out of her.
Sure.
So she and Raoul go home to their mansion in England. Raoul's now a diplomat to the court of St. James. And you meet their son, Philippe, who is a musical prodigy, but he's cooped up in the house all day. He's bored. He wants to explore London. And they finally give in after his pleading, saying, "Stay with your governess." However, he takes the opportunity to get away at her back is turned, and that leads us to kidnapping and horror. Because who kidnapped Philippe? Is the Phantom involved? How's the Phantom back? How does Sherlock get involved in this? And there's some other interesting characters too from both Holmesian canon who will be in here, and also a character I'm not going to reveal quite yet unless you read it, but it's from
Sure.
another great author's works, who's going to be a major player in this. And I made sure he would fit that timeline as well. So
That's exciting. I really love, with your writing, how you kind of like tie that stuff in like that. I don't want to spoil stuff from your other works, of course, but how you make those little ties into reference in history. I really, really like that. How do you do a lot of history research in order to kind of be able to link all those pieces together?
somewhat, I do it more for American Dreams because I have to do a little more on the ball with the history.
Sure.
Obviously superheroes and history, at that point everything becomes elastic, but I
Hmm.
digress. With this, we have a little more leeway because we could just go with the Victorian milieu and know what's going on. But I have to look up like was the oily card still an impresario? At that point, he was. He probably was probably after, a little bit after the heyday of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas, but it works.
Sure.
I had to look up like what would be because we started the opera house in Covent Garden in London. So I was like, okay, what did it look like in 1895?
No.
Thankfully, there's archival photographs of that. So I just linked that to the script. So Jeremiah Shake, my artist, can take a look at it and say, okay, I can draw it like this and make it make sense. I had to figure out, okay, what's the politics going on back then? Because there's going to be something like that further on. I'm not going to reveal because spoilers. Um, what some of the situations like because I've never been to London, so I don't know what all these places look like, unfortunately. So I
Sure.
have to go in and check Wikipedia and Google and all these other places to say, okay, this relation to this, does this work here? And thankfully, it all works out in the end. There's probably more of a topsy-turvy version of London than accurate London, though I try to be as somewhat accurate possible if need be. Um, but I have to make sure it fits that time and era and milieu because this is like late Victorian era, so we can't be like, we can't go too Dickensian with it, but we still have, areas that still look pretty much like Urban now of a Charles Dickens novel
Yeah,
because remember the Ripper murders were like what 2 or 3 years before 1895.
something like that, I think.
So that was Whitechapel. Whitechapel at that time had not been cleared out of the slums and everything. It still looked pretty horrible and very Dickensian. And that's something that's going to come in issue 2 because we're going to go a bit to Whitechapel for that. And it's really funny because the original Holmes story I was writing was supposed to be a kind of a someone's copying Jack the Ripper, basically after a particular group because it's supposed to be a story about prejudice. And then I'm like, I don't know. I didn't know. I thought I was being a little too heavy-handed already with issue 1. I mean, a little too convoluted, so I put that to the side. And then I did this. So, but some ideas from my older idea might eventually be recycled in later series, hopefully.
Nice. So, what was the initial inspiration behind wanting to write a Sherlock Holmes slash Phantom of the Opera story?
I mean, originally supposed to do the Sherlock Holmes story because original older idea. But I
Yeah,
always just a fascination with the characters. I don't know what exactly sparked it, but I think sitting there on the day trying to think of a new idea. And like, I like Sherlock Holmes, I like Phantom of the Opera. Let's see if I can make it work together in a way that hasn't been quite done before. Because I said there's been other pastiches, but again, it's just like taking Holmes, dropping him into Phantom of the Opera, the original novel, and often displacing the character of the Persian, which I think is a disservice because the Persian is a character who's barely in any version of Phantom on film or stage. It's usually replaced by another character, usually another European, like the character of Ledoux in this 1925 silent family opera, who originally was supposed to be intending the Persian until they did rewrites on the set because we can't let a foreigner be the good guy in 1925.
sure.
And then, of course, in the musical, that role is also replaced by Madame Giry as the one who knows everything about the Phantom. And it's really interesting because for a book written in 1910, having a non-European character being one of the main good guys was very aggressive and radical for its time. And of course, that's the character gets cut from almost every adaptation, which is kind of disappointing. And when Holmes gets involved in these whole fandom pastiches, that's often the character that gets cut and they just put Holmes in there instead. Which is a disservice to the Persian character. And of course, when I'm writing this version, it's like, how do I do this while not being insulting to that character? Because his arc is done in the novel, and he in the terms of the fictionalized version of Gaston Leroux doing these interviews to make this novel, when he interviews the Persian, he's one of the last people the Persian sees before he passes away. So I had to make that decision. This for a little teaser for issue 2. I had a decision that the Persian's unaware that the Phantom might still be around, but he wants to keep it that way.
Hmm.
So I don't want to say yes, this character may be around, but he just might be completely unaware. I don't want to be like, okay, just replace the Persian with Holmes. In this case, he's around, but his arc is done.
I like
But
that.
it's a new story we're telling just with these characters.
So, tell me a little bit about your creation process to craft the story.
So I originally sat down, I wrote out a whole bunch of notes, basically like story beats I want to hit. Just little random ideas of like, can we do this? Can we do that? And then I started writing issue 1, 2, and 3. And I was writing started issue 3. At the time I wanted to pitch to Mad Cave, which I did, and I didn't get it in. So I was talking to them at Baltimore Comic Con a couple weeks ago, and they're like, not saying you would get it if you resubmitted and say we would take it, but in general, if you reduce it to 4 to 5 issues other than the six you planned, there was planned to be a 6 issue series. Someone would be more likely to take it. So I have insomnia at conventions. So I'm tossing and turning. I'm like, you know what? Remembering that I took my notes for what have been issues 4 for 6 and somehow condensed them and changed them to be 4 to 5. So I was like, it's heading through adversity. But usually it's just a lot of notes, sometimes outlining, or sometimes I'm just taking my notes, checking them, and then thinking, this plot point goes here, this plot point goes here, this plot point goes here. The combination of plotting and pantsing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I try to be a plotter, but I'm very much more a pantser.
Yeah. They usually I have an idea in my head and I'll notes, but I won't exactly have like a strict line by line by line thing.
Yeah,
Now, in contrast with my two next issues in Night Raft, which I originally wrote quasi Marvel style, which I wrote page one, this that happens, page two, this happens. Like what but like a paragraph that is more accurate, more detailed page by page.
sure.
But then we had to switch artists because my original Night Raft artist got busy with other projects, including one with Leslie Snipes. So
I remember that.
we had to get a new artist, and that new artist is like, I don't do Marvel method, I need a full script. So thankfully, I wrote down a page by page breakdown, so it's easier for me to turn that into full script
Sure.
than me going, oh no, what do I do? And then having to reconfigure an entire script
Nice.
out of a paragraph.
So you said originally this was planned to be 6 issues, but now you've kind of condensed it down to five. Is that right?
Right, but that was after the first three were written and kind of baked. So,
Oh, gotcha.
so, but, so it's editing for adversity.
So do you have plans on maybe after you hit issue five, maybe continuing the story in a different, like another 5 issues, or maybe switching up the story to be something different, like Sherlock Holmes meets blah 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 other character?
But that's the idea because the idea is look at the full title is Crimson Casebook for Sherlock Holmes subtitle.
Ah,
Um,
okay. Okay.
so I do have plans for sequels with other characters,
Okay.
but each character, each monster, so to speak, that he goes up against is going to be like a 5 issue series, beginning, end. There may be some plot threads to continue later on, but it's firmly, self-contained stories that may build up to a climax.
Nice. Um, and would there be any possibility, since it kind of exists in the similar timeline, that we might see this crossover with American Dreams at all, possibly?
I'm debating it right at the moment. I'm keeping it relatively separate universes just to make
Ah,
things
okay.
easier. Also, because this is under my Castle Thunder imprint versus Atlas Studios imprint, so it's separate worlds for now.
That
But
makes sense.
yeah,
Because I know you were having kind of, with, Knight and Rook and Night Wrath and Liberty all kind of be in one universe. So that's kind of keep your superheroes over here and keep your other stuff over this way.
right.
That's not a bad idea.
It is more of a horror adventure. I call it a thriller, for lack of a better term,
Sure.
because it's what it is. It's not pure horror. It's not pure mystery. It's not pure action. It's a thriller. It's like a mixture of all of them.
Nice.
So as Peter Cook, Peter Cushing would point out, it would fall all under fantasy.
That works.
There's an interview of him by the BBC I watched, and he was talking about how he would not call it horror, he would call it fantasy because horror to him would be more like war and everything like that because he lived through World War II.
Yeah,
And him, he figured these monster characters would fit more in a fantasy. This is a dark one.
makes sense.
And you should know he was Van Helsing.
Yeah, that's true.
And Frankenstein. And Sherlock Holmes.
There you go. So let's talk a little bit about your Kickstarter. How's that going? We have stretch goals. We have other special things planned.
Well, stretch goals are planned, but we hit the initial goal as of yesterday. Oh, and we just went up another bit. So we are
Fantastic.
definitely past our initial stretch goal. So we have to figure out what comes. Our initial goals. So I have to figure out what comes next.
Do we have any other kind of like special extras or something like that included in this campaign?
Well, we had as our biggest tier a one off, which was you can get a custom mask that we would design for designer, which has already been made. It actually should be here maybe today.
Oh, nice.
Which is great. It was actually one of my old boss who bought it, so it's like that was the one special big
Oh,
thing
wow.
we came up with. So I have to figure out what would be some interesting stretch goal. I have to talk about that with my Kickstarter crew and see what we can come up with now that we are past our initial goal.
Nice. And we've got just a couple more weeks left, right? The
Yep,
17th?
and it's on in 12 days.
Oh man, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So well, um, after this campaign, what do you have coming up next that you can talk about?
Well, I am planning on doing American Dreams 6. I just have to, get a few things squirreled away for that. It's basically ready to go, but I have to get this one fulfilled before I even touch
Sure.
American Dreams 6 as a
Yeah.
thing. They were just going between which one to go through, and this one went out a little bit because it was a new concept. And but American Dreams will be coming back. Arc 2 is fully written and drawn. It's being colored, lettered, covered, but issue 6 is ready to go.
Very cool. I'm very excited for that.
Plus, I want to coordinate with Band of Bards because they took up the original run and posted it in stores last year. So I want to have them be part of that too.
That's awesome. And so you're working with them to get on board with them for the next issue, the next arc as well.
I'm talking to them. Like, we'll see. It's creator owned, so I can do.
Yeah.
You but I want them to because they so gracious picking up volume one. I want them to be part of volume two as
Sure.
well.
No, that makes
Or
perfect
issue three.
sense.
So I have to talk to them and figure stuff out.
Sure. All right. Well,
Coming up and up.
very cool.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, I usually like to give the creators a second to share some wisdom, share some advice for other fellow creatives. So if you were to share one bit of advice with your fellow creatives, what would it be?
People keep asking me this. I'm going to repeat what Jim Lee said to someone on a stream when they asked, "What should I do to get start doing a comics?" And it's
Okay,
they just use the Nike slogan, "Just do it,"
fair enough.
because it might not be the best to start, but like if you just start it with a script, sketch, concept, just that alone gets you start going as a creator. And you may not, and that's your first step. You just have to go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the one after that. And eventually, you will have that comic. But you just can't say, "Oh, I want to do this." You need to just start
That's good.
instead of just twiddling your thumbs.
Because you're never going to get anywhere if you don't ever try.
Right.
Very cool. All right. So where can we stay up to date with you on all things coming from you? Where can we find you on the internets?
You can find me on Facebook at Daniel Kalban. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at @eCalban. You can find me on Twitter at Daniel Kalban because apparently someone took D Calvin before I got there. Um, there's also the American Dreams uh Facebook page, which I update every now and then. And there's my link tree as well, which I think you might have access to because I'm pinned on my Facebook and my Twitter. Where you can get all my things on my Substack at calvin.substack.com, and so on and so forth, including links to like the Band of Bards store for if you want to get a copy of American Dreams.
And you definitely do because American Dreams is fantastic.
Mhm.
All right. So make sure we check out the link to Sherlock Holmes, The Phantom Masquerade issue 1. I'll make sure we put the notes or put the URL in the notes of the show so we can get it out and help spread the word. And you have until October 17th to check this out. So don't wait. And for me, I like to thank Polygon Horizon. They're a great band. Their song Pizza Force is the song that I use for this show. Go check them out on Bandcamp. They're fantastic. You can find the show Fueled by Weird on Instagram and Facebook just at Fueled by Weird. Shoot me an email at fueledbyweird@gmail.com. You can also find me on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also now find me on the Spotlight Media GA app, along with the rest of the Stay Weird Network boys. The Nerdy Manroom Show with Hassel and Monster, Hassel's Review, and Big Rob's House of Entertainment and No Chinese Food. Now, Stay Weird Network, it's a brand new podcast network dedicated to bringing some awesome back to the internet. Check us out at Stay Weird Media on YouTube and Instagram and shoot us an email at stayweirdmedia@gmail.com. Also, I want to thank my sponsor, The Zone Collectibles in Tifton, Georgia, your one-stop shop for comics, collectibles, and so much more. And if you like the show, please leave a review and tell your friends because word of mouth is my friend. And remember, kids, life's too short to be normal, so stay weird. Daniel,
Mhm.
thanks so much again for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.